All right, welcome back, everyone. My name is Dave. I've got Scott Ritter with me again. Scott really needs no introduction. You know who he is. He's been on before. He's one of the most sought after analysts for this conflict in Ukraine and a few other things going on in the world, like China right now, Scott. And welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, doing great, doing great. Just ramping up as we were talking there to nuclear war, World War III, however you want to describe it. Just things don't look good. We got some very interesting developments. Let's start off with the drone incident because I think it's important to talk about this. Um, the Russians, I guess, they're trying to recover this drone. This was what they call a Reaper. I'm not really that familiar what the Reaper can do. Is it just intelligence gathering, or does it have any other capabilities?
No, the Reaper's a very advanced system. It can carry weaponry, Hellfire missiles, newer um, laser guided bombs, things of this nature. On this particular mission, it was on an intelligence gathering mission. It had strapped underneath its left wing, I believe, an advanced signals intelligence, electronic intelligence collection pod. So it was on a very provocative flight profile designed to anger the Russians deliberately. This was a deliberate action by the United States, hoping to prompt the Russians to activate certain systems that would allow the United States to gather intelligence that could then be passed on to the Ukrainians. Understand that that's what we're doing. We're not gathering intelligence for our sake. We're doing it as part of a cooperative, um, arrangement with the Ukrainians, where our intelligence is used to assist them in the targeting of Russians, to kill Russians, to destroy millions of dollars of Russian equipment. So, from the Russian perspective, what the United States did was an act of war, an active participant in war, and Russia would have every right to shoot down this aircraft. But because Russia doesn't want to go to war with the United States, they made every effort to get the United States to terminate the flight of this drone. 19 passes. 19. I mean, I don't know if you're the drone operator why you don't get the hint. 19 passes, and then in the end they used an old tactic. It's a tactic that goes back to the Cold War. Dump fuel. You dump fuel on it and you try and get it to go away. They used to dump fuel on our manned reconnaissance aircraft to get them to move away, and they dumped it here. And apparently, the propeller blades of the Reaper can't withstand the weight and velocity of the liquid, and they got bent out of shape. The plane lost its aerodynamic qualities, and it went into the water. I understand the Russians right now are actively trying to recover it. And from their perspective, they hope to gain access to this pod and find out what exactly the United States was up to.
Yeah. The way, of course, it was reported in Western media is that the Russians took it down, and this is an act, provocative act on their part, not on our part. And it kind of reminds me, Scott, of all of the just what I would call pretext or false flag type activities to then go to the American public and say, look, this is bad. I mean, look at what Russia is doing here. And that was really, at least a 2 day news cycle. It just kept going where, and I was waiting for somebody to go on TV. And then, of course, we had Lindsey Graham go on TV, and he's mad, of course, that the Pentagon isn't acting quick enough. We're not doing enough. Is this just propaganda, Scott, so we can just put our cards on the table and say, look, we are directly involved? I mean, you and I know the United States are, but the general public thinks this is a war that Ukraine is fighting against Russia. So this is, I think, one step down the road toward trying to convince the American people that, yeah, this is a worthy endeavor. And now the Russians are the ones being provocative.
Well, the good news is that Lindsey Graham is once again proving why he should never, ever, ever, ever be allowed into the White House. He's a grossly irresponsible human being. a warmonger of the highest order. And if there was justice in the world, he'd be hauled before a court of appropriate jurisdiction, found guilty of crimes against humanity, and hung by the neck until dead. No, I'm serious. This man is a criminal of the highest order. He is literally, and every American listening to this, before you get mad at me, contemplate. He wants your children to die. He wants you to die. For what? So Lindsey Graham can stare in a camera and look tough. He's never been tough in his life. I mean, if you want to come up with the living embodiment of perfumed flower, it's Lindsey Graham. There's nothing manly about him, and yet he wants to sit there and talk as if he's a man, as if he's the fighter pilot that would go up and fly an escort mission for the next MQ-9 Reaper to fly a provocative flight mission profile along the coast of Crimea, one of the most heavily militarized zones in a war zone. Does Lindsey Graham not understand that Russia is at war with Ukraine, a war that we provoked? Well, of course he understands it, because in 2017, he was in Ukraine telling the Ukrainian soldiers, it's time to go on the offensive, that America's with you. We want you to go on the offensive against the Russians. This is a war against Russia. That's Lindsey Graham saying that. And again, I want to remind everybody that when the war starts, Lindsey Graham will take his perfumed ass and sit it down in some sort of underground bunker in Washington, D.C. area while your sons and daughters die. So this little fat, pompous asshole needs to shut up or be told to shut up. He shouldn't be allowed to pontificate. I know he's a senator, free speech. That's his duty, responsibility, but he should be dismissed, mocked, derided. In the old days, we were tar and feathered this fat prick. And that's what he deserves. He deserves to be tarred and feathered and hauled out of Washington, D.C., dumped in the Potomac, and maybe he can swim and survive. Hopefully not, and he'll drown. I don't like this guy. He wants everybody to die. He's stupid. Good news is he doesn't have a vote. Literally, he has no power, none whatsoever. Lindsey Graham is a powerless prick. And so all he can do is stand there and pontificate on TV. The people that count, for instance, General Cavoli, the commander of U.S. forces in Europe, commander of all allied forces in Europe, he did the wise thing. While the State Department was shouting out, we have a right to fly anytime we want, anywhere, and this will not stop us. Well, he said, shut down the operations right now. We're going to do a review. The wise thing to do. Maybe people should start asking, why are we flying this mission profile? There's a thing called, risk gain assessment. It's normally done. What smart people do. We want to accomplish X. In order to accomplish X, we're going to do Y. But the potential consequences of Y could be Z. Is X greater than Z? If the answer is yes, then you do X. But if the answer is no, then you don't do X. And maybe somebody now needs to take a look at this and say, what we're doing is stupid. First of all, is the intelligence we're collecting of such a quality that it's worth going to war over? And the answer, of course, is no. We can collect this intelligence using other means. The Reaper is not a strategic asset. It's a tactical asset. Flying that close to Crimea could be used to collect, cell phone data. I mean, you go back to what it was used for in the war on terrorism. It could go and collect cell phone data, some radio data, some other signals data, low power stuff that maybe satellites can't get. I don't want to get into too much technical details here on things, but it's common knowledge. But what's also common knowledge is when the Reaper takes off and flies on a pattern, I would imagine that the Russians send out an alert to everybody with one of these things, and it says, shut her down, put it in the bag. And they grab their little bag and they put it in there and they zip it up so no signals are in, and the Reaper comes by and gets no intelligence because it's not a covert asset. Yes, we might have turned off the transponder so it can't be easily tracked, but the Russians have radar and they put fighter planes up there. They tracked it. So you're not gathering intelligence. You're provoking the Russians. That's what you're trying. You're trying to prove a point that Crimea does not belong to Russia. That's simply the point we're making. You see, because the Russians have, as they are allowed to do by law, It's international airspace over international waters. Yeah, but the Russians get to shut it down when they want to for sensitive military operations. And the Russians have said, this is a sensitive military operation. We're shutting her down. And in comes the drone, and they say, you can't fly. And say, well, you don't own Crimea, so you don't get to shut down the airspace. And Russia went, try me, and brought it down. Hopefully, smart people, smarter than Lindsey Graham, um, recognize this and say, okay, guys, we did it. It cost us $32 million because that's what a Reaper costs, but that doesn't include the pod. There may be some sensitive intelligence compromise here, et cetera. But we're not going to do it again. It's not worth it. You know, the British learned that lesson. If you remember, before this war started, back I think in the summer of 2021, the British took a destroyer and decided to take it on a joyride alongside the Crimea coast. And the Russians came out and they shut down the water space, just like they shut down the airspace. And British said, we don't recognize it because you don't own Crimea. And they sailed through it, and the Russians came out and fired warning shots. And then the Russians just came out and straight up told the British, do it again, we sink the ship. Okay, we're tired of playing games. Do it again, we dare you. We will sink the ship, and any other ship that's there, bring it on. And the British are like, we have freedom of navigation. Fine. Did they send another ship? No. You know what's not going to happen? The U.S. is not going to put a drone through that airspace again. And they're not going to put up a fighter escort because people smarter than Lindsey Graham are doing the cost benefit analysis and saying, this ain't worth it. This juice ain't worth the squeeze. We made our point. We now have a diplomatic talking point that we can throw out there on the table about the Russians' aggressive actions and all that. But it cost us $32 million, and we're not going to pay that price. We're definitely not going to put up a couple of aircraft to escort it that will be shot down in a second. The second the Russians come in and start bumping them out of the way, what are you going to do? Shoot at the Russians? The whole forte of the American air power is long-range engagement. So if you're sitting there off the coast of Crimea, you ain't long range. You are right in their death trap. So literally, the pilots that go up to escort are signing a death sentence. And Lindsey Graham wants this. I want the wives of the pilots or the husbands of the pilots who could be flying that mission to think carefully about what Lindsey Graham's doing. He wants your loved ones to die. For what? So that pompous, perfumed prick can sit there and pontificate on national TV as if he's some sort of tough guy. He's not. He's not.
Yeah. Well said. Speaking of death and destruction, Scott, the U.S. apparently has taken a account of how many Ukrainian soldiers have died so far in this conflict, and they estimate, according to Politico, that over 100,000 soldiers have died. And I don't know if that number is low or if it's high, but I don't know why they're putting out this information. Are they trying to say that they're willing to kill as many people as possible to, the last Ukrainian? Are they trying to tell you that, hey, that we're well on the way to the, fighting until the last Ukrainian? This is just not a good headline to put out. It doesn't look good for humanitarian reasons because people think to themselves, wow, that's a lot of soldiers. Maybe they're not doing so well. Is it worse than this, Scott? Are we just getting the tip of the iceberg, or do you think this number is fairly accurate?
First of all, the number is grossly inaccurate. We know that General Zaluzhny reported to the Americans earlier this year that the actual death count was almost 250,000, 250 some odd thousand. And when you tap on to it, 83,000 missing, and rectify that most of those missing are dead, we're up over 320,000. I think that's a number I threw out to you a little while ago. Pretty much right on the head, because I ain't stupid. Right. You can say what you want about me, but when it comes to war and grinding the numbers, I'm smarter than just about every other asshole out there. I'm just tired of people, up there throwing shit out there. 320,000 is a good number. It's a horrible number, but it's a solid number. It's a number that's based upon really good analytics of what's going on the battlefield, the amount of artillery, the amount of destruction, the tactics used by both sides. So yeah, well, I have to read the political article. I haven't, so I can't sit here and tell you what spin they're trying to put on it. Are they trying to lowball it, saying it's only 100,000, or are they trying to, because the fact of the matter is, I mean, Politico is supposed to be a reputable journalistic outlet. So for them to put out 100,000 number and not sit there and say, horse shit, you were told by the Ukrainians it's 250,000 plus 83,000 missing. Why are you lowballing this? What is the purpose of the U.S. government coming in with a lowball number when you, if I believe you said the source was Lloyd Austin, Lloyd Austin, you were briefed by Zaluzhny. You're a lying sack of shit. That should be the article, the headline of the political article. Lloyd Austin is a lying sack of shit, trying to lowball the number to somehow make this war more attractive to the American people. The reality is 320,000 Ukrainians lost their lives because of Lloyd fucking Austin. Remember Lloyd Austin, you fucking asshole, who came back in May of last year and stood there and said, we want to bring pain to Russia. That's the purpose. We want this to hurt. Well, the only people hurting are the Ukrainians. It's your fault. I'm swearing a lot. But it just angers me. I mean, what in God's name goes through the minds of these people as they start throwing around numbers as if it's some more sort of, academic exercise? These are human lives. Now, for every Nazi life in there, I don't cry. Right. Not at all. I really hope that before they died, that it was mangled, they're bleeding, they're suffering. I really don't hope that, because nobody deserves that. But I have no sympathy for the Nazis. But for the average Ukrainian soldier out there who comprises the majority of the numbers out there, they didn't deserve this. They didn't ask for this. This is a war that could have been ended. And I remind everybody listening, the Russians wanted this war over on 1 April. The Russians never wanted this war. They tried everything possible to prevent this war. Remember Minsk Accords? It wasn't Putin that sit there in the background saying, which is a sham. We're using this as a sham to build up. Putin was actively trying to make this thing work up until the very end. It was the Ukrainians, Poroshenko, then Zelensky. It was Merkel. It was Hollande, and then Macron. These are the guys that lied to the world, and they were all backed up by the biggest liars of them all, and that's the United States of America, who was running the whole show. We made this war happen. When the Russians, having engaged in a conflict, sought the shortest possible, time of combat to get to the negotiating table. That was all they were doing in phase one, trying to get the Ukrainians to the negotiating table. They did. They had 3 meetings in early March. Then they got them to Istanbul 1 April. There was a peace treaty ready to be signed. A peace treaty ready to be signed. Lloyd, shut it down.
Yeah.
Lloyd Austin. Okay, so another person, Lindsey Graham, will go to court, be found guilty, and hung by the neck until dead. Lloyd Austin should be right on the gallows next to him, along with Jake Sullivan, Joe Biden. I can't say Joe Biden. I don't mean any harm to the President of the United States. None whatsoever. So Secret Service listening in, purely an academic exercise going through in my mind, but I'm not threatening the President of the United States. Once he stops being President of the United States, if he can be hauled before a court of proper jurisdiction, found guilty of committing crimes against humanity, he should be given the appropriate justice. But while he's serving as the president, he needs to be protected in every way, shape, or form. There. Now we've prevented ourselves from committing felonies on here. But no, these people are horrible human beings who have gone down a road that they failed. I mean, people need to understand there's not one aspect of American policy towards Ukraine that has succeeded. Not one. Angus King, the asshole from Maine,
yeah,
a pompous independent who claims to be Mr. I'm so pragmatic, I'm so wise. You're a dick. You're the guy that was out there selling sanctions as if they were some sort of golden fucking ticket. Sanction them, sanction them, sanction them. Well, you had to call people before them and say, why aren't sanctions working? Well, they're not working because the Russians are smarter than you, Angus King. You're just a dipshit from Maine. You don't know jack shit about anything. You don't know anything about the Russian economy, because if you did, you wouldn't have tried this. But you tried it and you failed. Every aspect of it has failed. It is hurting us and it's destroying our allies. Yeah. Angus King. So we got Lloyd Austin, who claims he wants to use this conflict to hurt Russia. All he's done is destroy Ukraine. And you got Angus King, who wants to have sanctions to hurt Russia, but all he's done is destroy our economy. Not one aspect of this has worked. And if you remember, Joe fucking Biden in Geneva in June 2021, coming out and then impromptu press conference. I tried to warn Putin, don't get near the Chinese. The Chinese are, they're not worth. They're coming after you, man. They're your enemy. The Chinese are worthless. And when the Chinese, talked about maybe a potential peace plan, what did we say? China has no credibility or none whatsoever. Hey, fuck off, guys. You know what the Chinese just did? The Chinese sat down with the Saudis and the Iranians, who we've been trying to bring together in war, and they negotiated a peace deal.
Yeah.
Wow. Big time peace deal that when you think about it in the larger context of both Iran and Saudi Arabia seeking to join BRICS, BRICS, that non-G7 economic forum, owning the world right now. Yeah, they're going there, working together, bringing all that oil economy over here, joining the Russians, who have a big oil economy. They're going to dominate the oil market. So the United States and Europe run around saying you're going to put a price cap on Russian oil. Fuck off. The international oil producing community just told you to pound sand. And you know who else is part of that too? Venezuela. They ain't playing the game either. We just fucked ourselves. That's what we do. So the Chinese did that. You know what the Chinese are getting ready to do? Remember when we said they have no credibility on Ukraine? They're getting ready to actually negotiate a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. Now, I don't know if it's going to succeed. It's a tall order. But the fact that Xi Jinping is flying to Moscow to meet, to do this. If you know anything about diplomats, and there's another thing I know, I'll tell you, I can count up dead people. I know how diplomacy works because I've been there and done it on both counts.
Yeah.
Senior national heads of state don't fly to foreign capitals for hypothetical meetings. They fly to foreign capitals because all the diplomats underneath them have been talking for weeks and months to come up with an agreed upon proposal. So if Xi Jinping is coming to Moscow to talk about the potential of a discussion with Zelensky about a peace plan to bring it into this conflict, it's because Russia has agreed in principle to some basic terms. And so there is a peace plan on the table, ladies and gentlemen. There is one. Now, the Russians don't work like we do in the United States, where they leak everything to the fucking New York Times so that it can be talked about before it happens. No, they actually carry out good diplomacy, where they sit down confidentially, put it out so they can meet with Zelensky without, Xi meets with Zelensky without any pressure being put on. There is a real serious peace plan in the works. Whether Zelensky will be able to do it, whether the United States and Europe will be able to let him do it, that's another question. The Chinese and the Russians are doing something we are incapable of doing, thinking about bringing an early end to this war. Now we come back to the original premise of your question. It has killed more than 100,000 Ukrainians, closer to 320,000 Ukrainians. And if this war continues, that number will end up being over 500,000 Ukrainian dead. Yeah. So people, please pray for the success of the Chinese peace plan.
Yeah, and what people are saying about all this, Scott, both on the left and the right, which is real interesting to watch. The left, like I've talked about before, they have this issue with Russia, people on the right, same issue with China. So now the fact that Russia and China are getting together, this is like the perfect storm of neoliberalism, neoconservatism coming together for this common cause, right? Of watching this happen and not having any control over it. This is what's driving all of these so-called government officials and people in the military. They can't control this. There's nothing they can do about it. And we talked about BRICS a long time ago, but BRICS is looking a lot cooler. I'd like to join BRICS. I'd like to be a member of the BRICS because you know why? Well, I can get cheap energy, Scott. Saudi Arabia is my new filling station, right? And we're just looking the other way because we're just going to keep building solar panels because they're going to solve all our problems. And we just need more solar. We need more electric cars that people can't afford. And by the way, more bank failures while we're at it, So we've got a lot of things going for us here in the United States, Scott, and everybody's just looking the other way. And I think the question I had for you, which again I went off on a tangent, is what would motivate, other than maybe some sort of childhood problem for Lindsey Graham? I almost call him Lindsey Buckingham. Shows you that my mind is somewhere else. But what is
Fleetwood Mac is a good group.
Yeah, they are, and it's more interesting than Lindsey Graham. That's for sure. I mean, you want to don't stop thinking about tomorrow. You should actually, because we might not be here tomorrow pretty soon. But the point I'm trying to make here is, what's the motivation? What are we getting? What is the United States getting out of all of this, other than like they're losing their mind because they're losing their world dominance? And this is crazy to think this way, because when I was a kid, hey, the United States, greatest country on the planet. We're, the world's peacekeepers. The world, we make sure the bad guys don't do bad stuff. And now we're supporting you. You mentioned these nice Ukrainian Azov folks over there who, you wouldn't be all that upset if a few of them, all of them, sorry, you wouldn't be upset that they all just got wiped out. And that's how we were during World War II, I'm thinking, right? So what happened? Why? What changed, Scott?
Well, I mean, what changed is that we have a socioeconomic political model that Dwight Eisenhower warned us about. It's predicated on a military-industrial commission congressional complex that needs global conflict or the threat of global conflict to justify its existence. So the United States literally cannot live in a world that's at peace. I think people should reflect on that. We can't live in a world that's at peace, because if the world's at peace, then the basic underlying assumptions made about every aspect of American life go away. We have to be at war. We are the cancer to the world. That's the reality. Now, the good news is the world appears to have some very effective chemotherapy that's the cancer.
Nice.
And so the world is now, the cancer is very dangerous because it has this nuclear, aspect to it that can suddenly metastasize and kill everybody if it decides what. So you have to be careful how you excise the cancer. You don't want to burst it and get it to infect the body, but that's what the world is doing right now. Now you say, why are we behaving the way we behave? I went through flight school in the Marine Corps, and before you do this, because we are a naval service, we got to learn how to operate in the water. So I remember one of the very first thing it is, and I mean the story is pretty funny because I wasn't supposed to go to flight school. They had no intention of sending me to flight school. I was an intelligence officer in an artillery battalion, but I was off doing weird stuff in the desert, building capabilities that apparently violated the law. I didn't realize as a young lieutenant, and I went out to the Defense Logistic Agency and acquired a whole bunch of radios that I signed for, but I wasn't authorized to have. And I talked to General Motors about modifying a Humvee, and I talked to another group about modifying electronics, and I built up a couple $1 million worth of debt to the Marine Corps that I wasn't authorized to through. I built a really cool thing that allowed us to use RPVs for the first time to adjust artillery and to connect radar with the RPVs with the counter battery so we could instant fire on this. When people wonder how I know about artillery, I invented half the shit that they're using out there today. Now, I have to tell you, what they're doing is so much better than what I was doing, but I was making it up on a shoestring, actually on no budget, because I was apparently spending money I didn't have. So when phone calls started coming in to the commanding general about who the hell is this Lieutenant Ritter and why are we suddenly having to pay $1 million bill for this, and they called my battalion commander. My battalion commander is going, well, he really is trying to do the right thing. He's out there right now in the desert making miracles happen, and you want to put him in jail. So he called up and he said, we have to make him disappear real quick. And they went, well, there's a school seat at the flight for aerial observers. Go down and operate. They said, get him to it. So I was literally pulled out of the desert, taken in and told, disappear. But but before you disappear, you got to qualify in swimming. And it's a very advanced swimming thing. And so I'm like, I haven't swum a lap since I left the Marine Corps Officer Basic. I mean, I've been out here in the desert. I had to go to the swimming pool. And one of the things they teach you after you do all your counter drowning and your buoyancy and you have to swim your laps. So I'm already freaking exhausted. And he goes, okay, now we have to teach you how to recover a drowning person. And this comes back to why I'm bringing this up. Yeah. If you're in the water and you're drowning, and somebody's coming out to help you, logic dictates that you will do what that person tells you to do. You will follow the instructions and you will be rescued and saved. Logic. But what I learned in learning how to rescue a drowning person is that logic has nothing to do with what's going on. They are terrified. They are panicking. They are going to punch you, bite you, kick you, gouge you, scream you, kick you in the nuts, spit at you, whatever, to prevent you from rescuing them because they're scared. America is a drowning person.
Yeah.
The world is trying to rescue us. They're trying to give us the lifeline. They're trying to send out that rescue swimmer. And what we're doing is elbowing them, gouging them, biting them, kicking them, screaming them, trying to drag him under with us. That's what we are right now. So please don't try and find some logic in what we're doing. Lindsey Graham is part of this drowning process. He knows we're going down. And so he's basically like, except he could never be an old boxer because he could never box to begin with. But he's somebody who's trying to relive past glory, or at least a time when we had past glory that he could continue to steal as a representative in the United States Senate, pretending that he's somehow tougher. Because this man's been traveling all over the world trying to promote war, literally traveling all over the world trying to promote war. He is responsible for the deaths of millions of people.
Yeah.
That's why when people say, why do you have it in for Lindsey Graham? Because he's a mass murderer. He's a mass murderer who operates in our collective name. But he's symptomatic of this drowning victim right now that is the United States. And we are kicking, screaming. And if left to our own devices, before we go down, we're going to take everybody down with us because that's what drowning people do.
Yeah. It's just incredible what all of this is doing just to the American people have so many other problems going on, Scott, and
a few banks
right,
failing,
and some of us take a look at this, and you and I were paying attention to this every day, but most people are like, man, do these people not know? Have they been to the grocery store lately? Have they tried to, put gas in their car and do the basic things? I mean, the inflation rate is through the roof, and they don't see a correlation between our foreign policy and the banking crisis or anything, but it's all connected, isn't it?
It's all connected. Well, I mean, it's connected in terms of everything that's causing us to fail is based upon greed and arrogance. I mean, that's literally, e pluribus unum, from many one. That's supposed to be our motto. I don't know what Latin is. Give me more money, but because that should be the motto of America. We are the greediest people in the world, and if you have it, we want it, not at a fair price, but at a price that allows us to continue to, promote this psychology of consumerism. Because what is consumerism? It's about us going out and spending money to acquire things at a price that promotes the continued spending of money. Because if you make it too expensive, we can't afford it. So then we don't spend on it. So everything we want to buy the price has to be lowered. Now, how do we do that when the components of what we want to buy, if you priced them out using market value, would price it up to here? We have to go out and basically steal from the world. This is what we do. We take what you have, we steal it from you so we can bring it home and package it up and sell it at prices affordable to the American consumer. Greed, 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 greed. And so this is your mindset. This is the engine that makes America work. Except for the defense industry, where they have the exact opposite thing, where they take things that should only cost this much, but because everybody wants to make money, it ends up costing this much, so they can take all the money from us and give it to them, and et cetera. But when that's your approach, and, back in in the 20s, we had the great, the collapse of Wall Street led to the Great Depression.
Right.
And the reason why Wall Street collapsed is because people were greedy and they wanted to make free money. I mean, that's what the stock market is. The stock market should be the most insulting thing to the average American.
Yeah.
Because if you and I want to earn money, I either have to go work for a guy for hourly wage. He basically has determined that an hour of my time, of my life, is worth X amount of money. And I have to produce so many hours to get that much money. Then the government takes a lot of that away, but that's what I come home with to work. Or um, a product produced by me gets this price. So in order for me to make money, I have to write out X number of articles and get paid for those articles. All right, and that's fair. We understand that. That's a relationship, a business relationship. Stock market is about taking money, sometimes money you don't even have because they borrow on leverage,
Yeah.
and investing it, and then doing nothing, literally doing nothing, and then having it turn into lots of money. And now so you give it to an investment group, and if they underperform, God forbid they only give you 12% return. What do you mean 12% return? I wanted 40% return. Well, if you want 40% return, we have to do even more stupid shit. Do stupid shit. Well, that's why Congress came in and said, we're going to pass the Don't Do Stupid Shit bill. I think it was called Glass-Steagall. And it basically prevented banks from doing stupid shit with my money. The money that I made by working hourly wages or writing articles, and I put into the banks, and I created this pool of money, of wealth for the banks that they turned around and gave away to rich people so they can make even more fake money. So you're supposed to prevent that. But then the rich people said, well, we're not making as much money for free that we wanted to. And so Congress went, well, we'll start removing this, we'll start moving that. Bam, we're right back. And I don't know the exact reason why the Silicon Valley Bank failed, but my understanding is they had some bad banking practices that were empowered by the elimination of regulations that would have prevented that. And I can pretty much guarantee you that if Silicon Valley Bank is doing stupid shit, every other bank in America is doing stupid shit because they all think the same. There's hardly any banks in America that say, we care about our clients. The average working man and woman who slaves away on an hourly wage and then gives us and trusts us to secure their money, and we pay them fractions of a percentage on it because we're greedy shits, and yet we'll loan it out at higher percentage rates to people who don't have the ability to guarantee that that they have assets that offset any potential losses, because we all are about free money, and the bank is making free money too. Oh, we also make free money by thank you for giving us your money. Now, if you want to go to the ATM and get the money out, we're going to charge you for that. We're going to charge you for this. We're going to charge you services so that the paltry little percentages that we pay you in interest rates evaporate, and service fees, et cetera. So you give us money and you lose money. The Americans lose money by putting it in banks. That's just a guarantee. Yeah. We lose money by putting it in banks, but they make money by taking our money, giving it away people so they can make free money on the stock market. But now they've been called out. And whose banks aren't failing because of this shit? Russia.
Yeah.
Because one of the reasons why is they're no longer plugged into this insanity. Right. They unplugged, and Russia's sitting there going, all right, we're just sort of our own little closed circle of banks. We're doing okay. Ruble's fine. Good. Yep. Yeah. I mean, the Russians aren't making the massive profits that everybody else is, because that's just not how the world works, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to tell you, when you're in Wall Street, it's not fucking reality what you do.
Yeah.
It's not at all. You do nothing. You literally do nothing. I get up early in the morning. What? Look at a fucking computer screen. When's the last time you did work? Produced something? You sit there and you look at a computer screen, you make phone calls, you yell at people so that other people can yell at people, so the banks give away money so money can be made for free, fake money. And then you enrich yourself, and then once every couple of years you go out and you buy that new Lamborghini, Porsche, whatever you want. You have a house in the Hamptons. You didn't earn any of that. You stole it from us. And now you collapsed, and I guess we're going to have to bail them out again. Yeah. But yeah, Russia's not going through that.
Yeah, no, I mean, they just made a deal with Cuba. Cuba is now accepting the Russian payment system, according to a headline I read this morning. So that's quite.
Maybe we should. Maybe the average American citizen buy into the mirror system, because you know what? Money will be in a bank that isn't going to collapse overnight. Well, we got MasterCard, we got Visa, we got this. None of that shit works when your bank doesn't have any money. Yeah. Hey, Silicon Valley Bank guys, pull out your Silicon Valley issued MasterCard or Visa card and try and go and take some money out. Oh, you can't, because the bank failed. Yeah. You know what? Cuba's going to have that little mirror card. They'll be able to run around and go, Hey, how many pesos? I don't know what the Cuban thing is.
It's
Peso.
pesos, yeah.
I don't want to insult anybody by
Oh,
showing my ignorance, but I want to take out some pesos, or better yet, rubles. Because remember when it used to be, I want to take out pesos, or better yet, dollars.
yeah.
Well, now it's rubles because the ruble is a stable currency. The dollar is an unstable currency tied to an unstable system with unstable banking.
Yeah. And unstable people, you might want to add that to it too.
Well, people watching this show might say Scott Ritter is the epitome of unstable people, given the fact that I've been going off on it. But
Yeah.
anyways,
Well,
it is what it is.
all right. One more question before I let you go. Is the battle for Bakhmut, is that going to be the key battle, you think, to make this conflict either go one way or the other? Because I'm hearing a lot in the news that things are really bad as far as the Ukrainians go there, and Russia is they're getting ready to really ramp up, and it's springtime, just about springtime, and that I think that was your prediction early on that this kind of thing was going to happen. So where are we there? And then I'll let you go because I know you've got another interview to do shortly.
Well, if you look at, for instance, it's there's always a danger in using historical references um, so to visualize because it's never perfect. But let me give you two examples. If you were a student of the American Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
on 4 July 1863, would you have a good feeling that the corner had been turned? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Battle of Gettysburg is concluded. The Army of the Potomac is victorious over the Army of Northern Virginia. And anybody with a military math mind would say that the Union has the capacity to replenish losses. The Confederacy can't replenish losses. And now it's inevitable what's going to happen. And what's going to happen is Grant versus Lee, 1864, and the series of battles that the Confederacy, you know, theoretically won the battle but lost the war because they lost troops they can't replace, and you end up in Appomattox, the war over. We can also use the Eastern Front. We can talk about July 1943 and the Battle of Kursk, where the Germans threw everything they had into this offensive. It didn't work. Now the battle ended, and anybody who sits there with military math goes, the Germans no longer have the capacity to build up forces capable of withstanding the Soviets. The Soviets, on the other hand, have the capacity to build up forces that are capable of swamping the Germans. This will be over. Bakhmut, I believe, is going to be that kind of battle when history is written. It's one where both sides have put in considerable resources. The Ukrainians are losing. And at some point in time, the Ukrainians are going to break, and it's going to begin the process of collapse that will lead to, if this war continues along the lines that it's the trajectory it's heading, with Ukraine losing sometime end of summer, early fall. The Secretary General of NATO says straight up they're going to run out of ammunition. They being Ukraine, going to run out of 155 millimeter ammunition sometime this summer. Imagine that, running out of ammunition before you lose the war at the end of summer. I'm pretty confident with my analysis here. Now, the wild card here is China. I can't say that the Chinese have timed this diplomatic offensive to Bakhmut, but I think the Russians would have said, you can't just throw a diplomatic initiative out there, um, irrespective of the realities of what's going on the ground. It has to be timed properly so the other side is willing to concede what needs to be conceded to bring this war to an end, because Ukraine is going to be asked to concede a lot. Crimea, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Lugansk, all of that will be forever Russia, and Ukraine has to sign up on that. Yeah. Ukraine's going to have to agree to withdraw their military from the Russian border 150 kilometers with a demilitarized zone, and that'll be an enforceable zone. That's what demilitarization is called. That's that. Maybe Ukraine gets to say, we get to hold on to our army. That's one of the things they come back with. So demilitarization means 150 kilometers of no military, so you can never again fire an artillery shell that hits soil, but you get to keep your army. I don't know. That's a fine negotiating point. But the other thing they get to keep is access to the Black Sea. Odessa gets to remain in Ukrainian hands. Kharkov gets to remain. Dnipropetrovsk, they have an industrial base, a viable nation state. They're going to lose all that if they don't agree to this, because Russia is going to win at Bakhmut, and a victory at Bakhmut is going to open up not only the reconquest of the totality of Donbass, Donetsk, and Novaya Russia, but the process of pushing the Ukrainians back 150 kilometers. But if the Russians have to physically push you 150 kilometers, that requires them to take Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kharkov. Those cities will never again be Ukrainian, ever. Russia will expand through the annexation process of referendum, and they will take these countries, which will create permanent instability because the West will say, we can never accept that, and it'll be very difficult to get some sort of resolution. But if Ukraine signs off on accepting what is already here, accepts a peace treaty that keeps Zelensky in power, imagine that, then the West might say, we can support this, and we're going to nip this problem in the bud, and then we can get on to the business of bettering relations, which I think China would play a role in as well. So the Chinese initiative is one that everybody should pray succeeds. And it's timed, I believe, to Bakhmut, because you can't go forward with an initiative like that unless the military situation is such that Zelensky is confronted with the inevitability of defeat. I mean, at the end of the day, when the Chinese put an offer on the table that's somewhat attractive, that requires Russia to hold its nose, because from the Russian perspective, a lot of what I just said stinks to high heaven. Stinks. Letting Zelensky stay in power stinks.
Right.
Russia will hold their nose and say, okay, we can do that if this thing comes to an end and we preserve our territory and secure our people. But Zelensky can't do that if someone says, but boss, you can still win. Really? Nah, forget this peace treaty. I can still win. But Zelensky turns around and they go, boss, you can't win. You're going to lose. And the Chinese just came up with it. Their academy, military academy, just did the same thing. They've written a study that says Ukraine loses this war this summer. Imagine that. And so that's why I think the Chinese are also empowered to come to Zelensky and say, hey, guy, we ran the numbers. Scott Ritter's right. You're going to lose big time this summer. And therefore, this is the best deal you're ever going to get. This is a good deal. This allows Ukraine to survive as a nation. It allows you to stay in power. It allows your military to have honor. Yeah, you can never join NATO, but at least you're alive. And it doesn't shut the door to EU membership. I mean, that's another thing, because if Ukraine gets taken, they're not going to join the EU.
No.
But right now, bringing it into this conflict actually creates the conditions for EU membership. Now, EU is not going to let this rotting, stinking cesspool that is Ukraine join, but that's their business. From the Ukrainian perspective, the door still remains open. So it's the best deal in the world, but it's a deal that can only happen because of Bakhmut, because of the Battle of Bakhmut and the decisive defeat that's taking place at the Ukrainian army.
Well, there you have it, folks. You won't get analysis like this on regular channels, or at least the mainstream media. Scott Ritter, thanks so much for being here, sir. I know you got to run to do another one of these, and we appreciate you being here.
Well, thanks for having me.